Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning for this final morning at the Munich Security Council. So here we are to talk about the future of the European security architecture. Now, in all honesty, talking about the European security architecture today is not easy. We are in the middle of a war, and we don't quite know how that war is going to end. And of course, any order, any architecture is the product of a particular configuration of power, and so it will fundamentally depend on how this war will end. So at the moment, there are at least three logical possibilities. We either have Russia winning this war, in which case the order, quote unquote, or disorder that will emerge is one in which the norms of sovereignty and territorial integrity are trashed, and in which an order based on empire and imperial expansion is reasserted. We have the opposite extreme, one in which Ukraine wins this war, and that those norms of sovereignty and territorial integrity are reestablished alongside with Ukraine, and not only Ukraine's democratic consolidation. And then, of course, there is always the risk of a fudge in between, one in which neither side really prevails on the other, and in which a sort of unstable stability and low level of violence persists on the European continent. So I don't have a crystal ball, but perhaps the panelists today will. So let me start off by welcoming the High Representative and Vice President of the Commission, Josep Borrell, to kick us off with this discussion. Josep.
Good morning to everybody. Our security is being challenged by the war in Ukraine. That's what I told yesterday to the Chinese minister. We are arming Ukraine because this war is a challenge for our security, is an existential challenge for Europe. But I'm not going to be rhetoric and try to go to the point, because Zelensky and the Ukrainians have a lot of applaudissement and not enough ammunition. That's the paradox. They need to be less applauded and better supplied with arms. The Ukrainians are fighting, paying the highest price in terms of lives, but this war happens in European soil, affects us, and has a global impact around the world, which also affects our security. So let's talk about this short-term, long-term, our neighborhood, and in the wider world. What the German Chancellor called a Zeitenwende, in fact, is a Zeitenwende not only for Germany, but for all the Europeans. I think that we face three major challenges. First, our credibility as a global player. That's what we call the geopolitical Europe. Second, our strategic responsibility as a security and defense provider. And third, our engagement with partners around the world, and to preserve or even to rebuild a trustful cooperation with many of the so-called global South. President Macron said about that he was surprised by the big resentment that he perceived in many countries around the world. And I share this feeling. So when I took office in 2019, we started talking about the geopolitical Europe, to use the language of power. Europe is in danger, I said when we presented the strategic compass, and many wondered if this was not just a slogan, an exaggeration in order to sell better the product. Unhappily, the war in Ukraine has converted these slogans into a reality, a dramatic reality. And it has made us to wake up to a kind of adulthood. We have rediscovered the brutality of the interstate war in our borders, and we are becoming an actor, credible, able to use coercion to the ones who threaten us. As I said, Russia is threatening our security, and we are using coercion. We are becoming a hard power. What he has done, you know, as a lot of sanctions against Russian economy and Russian individuals. They are having effect. I don't go on detail, but if you have a look at the trade deficit, budget deficit, and income coming from selling hydrocarbons, these three key variables shows that this year Russia is going down. Last year was a very good year for them. This year is going to be a very bad year because we have been able to get rid of our dependency from Russian hydrocarbons. From 40% gas dependency to almost zero in a few months is an extraordinary achievement. Cap on the Russian oil. They are selling their oil at half the price of Brent, $40, when the Brent is at 80. And military support to Ukraine, directly from the European Union, not from the European Union budget. Let's clarify it. Not from the budget that the Commission manages, but from an intergovernmental fund, a kind of a club that member states happily created in order to provide training and arms to our partners. The so-called European Peace Facility, the member states decided to use this fund to arm Ukraine, 3.6 billion, and the member states, each one on their side, some a lot, others less, provided all in all 12 billion euros of military support. And this is a major achievement. It is the first time that we do that. We have broken a taboo. And it is important to continue doing that. We are the most important trainer of the Ukrainian army. By the end of the year, 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers will be trained by our military missions. I don't go to the details, but this is what we have been doing. But much more has to be done, and much quicker. There is still a lot to be done. We have to increase and accelerate our military support to Ukraine quickly. The first and most urgent thing that the geopolitical Europe has to do is to arm Ukraine. If we said, as all the European leaders here said yesterday, that Russia cannot win this war, that Ukraine has to prevail, then let's go from the words to the facts and accelerate our military support to Ukraine, because Ukraine is in a critical situation from the point of view of the munition available. And I think that we can say that we have been taking too many times to take critical decisions, as providing battle tanks, when everybody knows that in order to win a classical war with trenches and maneuvers of heavy arms, you need battle tanks. You will not win this war without this kind of arms. And now this shortage of ammunition has to be solved quickly. It's a matter of weeks. And this cannot be solved by going to joint procurements and buying, because any procurement that comes to the market will go at the queue of a long list of commands already passed by the member states. We have to use what we have, what the member states have, and they have to provide quickly a part of the ammunition, waiting to refill their stocks with the commands that are already being passed. In the short term, we need, and we have the tools, we have the European Peace Facility that can engage their resources in order to provide quickly ammunition to Ukraine. And in the medium term, we have to increase the capacity of our defense industry, much more. But this is not going to happen overnight. And we have to go, and we also have the tools to do that. We have the European Defence Agency, which is something specialized in these kinds of matters, in order to get more ammunition for all of us, but mainly and with a strong priority for the Ukrainians. Don't confuse the short-term objectives with the medium-term purposes. Short terms, very short terms, more ammunition to Ukraine. This is a matter of the Ministry of Defense. It's the Minister of Defense the current ministers of defense who have to take these kind of decisions. And it's going to be an extraordinary meeting on the 6th and 7th of March, where we will propose to accelerate the process that are already on the way. And I think that working all together, we can manage. More broadly, we have to do our homework. This homework is being defined by the strategic compass that was approved some days before the war started. And there is clearly defined how we can increase our role as security and defense actor. On the new battlefields, the cyberspace, the sea, places where the world will have a different characteristics, maritime security, space security and defense, among others, cyber defense, because, we forgot about classical wars. We were only engaged on expeditions and blitzkrieg, technological blitzkrieg. These old wars, we were not prepared, we forgot about them. And now we have to recover capacity, but keeping in mind that the war in the future will be a different one, and will require different capacities. And our industry has to speed up, and our procedures also. It takes almost 10 months for the European Army to buy a bullet for a cannon of 155 millimeters, almost 1 year, and almost 3 years to buy an air-to-air missile. This is not in accordance with the things that we are living today. This is not in accordance with the war situation in which we live. This war has also strengthened the role of NATO, who has become again a crucial actor for the territorial security of Europe, but it's also a way for the Europeans to share the responsibility for their defense. And then let's go quickly to the geopolitical landscape. Yesterday, President Macron and Chancellor Scholz talked about it. We cannot think about European security without looking beyond and engaging with partners around the world. I am traveling around the world, especially on the global south, and I see how powerful the Russian narrative that wants to reduce the war in Ukraine to a conflict between the West and Russia is powerful, and with a lot of accusations of double standards. We must debunk this narrative and explain how Russia acts as an imperialist power. President Macron said a neo-colonial power. Yes, it is what it is. Let's call it. It's an imperialist attitude from a powerful neighbor that wants to take control of someone who belongs to its political sphere. We have to fight the false narrative. We must engage with our partners, defending together the common good, United Nations Charter, but also being ready to accept that this charter has to be adapted to the current circumstances of our world today, which is not at all the world of 1945. The share of wealth, political influence, the number of people is completely different, and we have to adapt to it. This war has also underlined the vulnerabilities and needs of our partners in facing their socioeconomic and environmental challenges. And they fear that we focus only on Ukraine and that we divert from our responsibilities in other areas. They blame us for us. We have to reassure them that we will not do it, that we will increase our engagement and our responsibilities with the rest of the world. Because this war has increased the challenges that the world faces, and both in terms of prices, resources, economic growth, and political and socioeconomic troubles. We have to prove that we continue being a global actor, not only fixing our political, economic, and military capacity in this neighborhood, but taking very much into account in order to face this deep resentment in Africa due to post-colonial reasons. Russia supported us, or in Latin America, anti-imperialism feeling, you supported dictatorships, people have memory and people have feelings. So we have to engage more, showing that we are defending universal values, not only values that are good when Ukraine, our neighbor, is being invaded, but it's a guide for us for our geopolitical action as a security provider and also as someone who defends the United Nations Charter and principles in a constant and comprehensive and coherent way. This is the big challenge in front of us. Short-term, quick ammunitions. Medium-term, increase the capacity of your defense industry. And from now, from tomorrow, and for a long time, to look at our partners in the South in order to make them to participate in the world reaction against Russia for the war in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, High Representative. And now let me welcome on stage Kaja Kallas, the Prime Minister of Estonia. Ulf Kristersson, the Prime Minister of Sweden. And Radek Sikorski, there you are, Member of the European Parliament. So the High Representative there talked about the short, the medium, and the long term. And let's try to the extent possible in the next hour and a bit to focus on that medium and long term. We've talked a lot about, obviously, the short term over the last couple of days. Now, of course, we don't have that crystal ball into the future, but what we know is what we can do now. And what we do now can determine, or at least shape, the extent to which we move towards either one extreme or the other, and perhaps avoid that fudge in between. What I would also say, and this points to that distinction between the medium, the short, medium, and the long term, is that there is a difference between what it means for Russia to lose this war and what it means for Ukraine to win this war. And of course, for Russia to lose this war, this is that short-term question, which really has to do with what weapons we supply to Ukraine. However, for Ukraine to win this war, Russia's defeat is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. What Ukraine needs is democratic consolidation, it needs economic reconstruction, and it needs security guarantees. So to the extent possible, I'd really like to focus this discussion on those sort of three sets of issues. And perhaps, Prime Minister Kristersson, let me begin with you, perhaps with actually a very broad brush question. Does it actually even make sense to talk about a European security architecture today?
Well, it does, I would say. It makes more sense to talk about using it than to changing it. And honestly, I mean, we lack a lot in Europe, we lack a lot in the democratic world, but we show what we really have. And just give an example, the day before the invasion, the full-scale invasion, I was in Helsinki, rather accidentally actually, having a talk to Finnish President Sauli Niinistö, and obviously we didn't know what's going to happen 4 o'clock in the morning after, but we did discuss that the immediate risk was there. But what we did discuss was actually the other risk: will we stay united? Will the European Union countries stay united, or will there be serious divisions between countries? And even more, will we stay united with the US, or will these kind of well-known differences that we had in the previous years, will they be kind of so obvious? And just to state the obvious, we did stay united, and we still do 1 year later. So I think there are, we have to see all the problems, but also see what we have managed to do. And extremely big respect for Ukrainians. I was in Kiev 2 days ago, and for them saying, you do deliver weapons, but you do deliver weapons too late, too reluctantly, instead of doing it earlier and more decisive. But nevertheless, there is a structure, architecture. We are using it. We are showing that when we are being put to the test. we actually do deliver. So I think so far so good, but that doesn't at all answer the long-term questions you have asked yourself and us.
And let me follow up, sort of beginning to zoom into some of these issues, and in particular the economic part of this puzzle. Now, could we reflect a little bit about, again, looking ahead to that great day in which Russia is defeated? Here we are thinking about economic reconstruction. In particular, what role do you think that we as Europeans should be playing, as opposed to the United States, other players, multilateral banks? And if we are to do the heavy lifting on this, should we be actually thinking now about what kind of mechanisms should be put in place? Thinking about the models that we used in the recent past, next generation EU-like, to think about Ukraine's economic reconstruction. I mean, it's very clear that we will need to invent some mechanism to cough up with an enormous amount of money. And of course, there's also the element of Russia's role in all of this. Is it possible to think about what Russia's contribution to Ukraine's economic reconstruction should be?
Well, the obvious answer would be what we actually started the work just a few days ago. We have a few hundred of billions of euros in frozen assets. I mean, that's not the one answer, but it's part of the answer. To unite on how much money is there, to unite on the legal possibility, the legal frameworks to be used to actually use these money for rebuilding and reconstruction, and other purposes as well. So my basic belief is that we have to be, this is not a think tank kind of long-term discussion. This is actually to take care of very immediate problems with very long-term consequences. And also to state the obvious, if we want to keep this unity with the US, very well proven yesterday, I would say, the European Union has to prove that we are extremely active in dealing with our own European affairs, not simply relying on the US taking care of it for us. Not at all in contrast to the US, quite the contrary, together with the US, but really be forward-leaning in our European ambitions. I think in terms of, for example, the frozen assets, it's a complicated question, but it simply needs as a clear answer as is possible, because when we have that answer, we can start to operationalize what we would do with this money.
Thank you. Prime Minister Kallas, moving on to security and defense, perhaps first a more medium-term question, as the High Representative put it, and then perhaps a more long-term one. On the medium term, actually over the last couple of days, we've been talking quite a lot about how our defense industry really needs to be rethought and reconfigured. And you've recently come up with a rather interesting proposal as to what role the European Union could play in this respect, modeled on the way in which we went about COVID-19. Could you perhaps say a little bit about that? And in particular, how is it that we could ensure that we generate that consolidated demand at European level in order for industry to respond?
Yes, the problem is that Ukraine needs ammunition, and we also need to replenish our stocks. And the question is, in the medium term, is it going to go away, the demand that we have? One is that we have promised in NATO to have this 2% of our GDP as security investments. And I was actually quite surprised a year ago to learn that not many fulfill this criteria that we have agreed. So now there is clearly the demand on the side of Ukraine, but also on the side of European countries that have sent to Ukraine and want to, also increase their own defense, because the risks and threats are higher. So what I've proposed is that we could use the same similar mechanism like we did with the vaccines, that European Union or European countries provide funds, and then European institutions, where European peace facility would be the one to procure and make the orders to the defense industry so that they could make the investments to actually make it faster. Because the Russian military industry is working in 3 shifts. Russia is firing in a day the monthly European production of artillery shells. Monthly production, and the European defense industry hasn't boosted its production. So where is the obstacle? Because clearly, if you read the room in terms of the trends that are in Europe, then there is clearly the demand, and in a market economy, when there's demand, there also has to be, or it will increase the capacity. So to make it faster because Ukraine must be able to defend themselves, to win this war so that Russia goes back to their borders, and this is not possible without the ammunition. And what I'm really concerned about is when I talk to some of the colleagues and also the defense industry that has said that, we don't have any orders. We actually don't have orders big enough to boost the production, to make the investments. So it seems to me that some of the countries are still in the hope that it will go away. We will give everything to Ukraine right now, and then, okay, let's draw the line here now and stop this because it's too expensive. And I think Russia is also playing on that, or hoping for that you will grow tired of your own initiatives, and then they have a lot of manpower, and as I said, their military industry is working in 3 shifts. So how to get through that? Even when this war ends, the threat are absolutely different, because everybody could see that what Putin has been talking about, he's actually serious. In 1925, nobody believed Hitler, but he was quite open about these goals. And in 2007, Putin here in this conference was very clear about these goals. The problem was that nobody believed him, but let's believe him now, so that we have to make the decisions in the medium term, but also long term.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, connected to this is, of course, the whole question, again, looking at that long term, of Ukraine's security guarantees. Precisely because even in the best of circumstances, it would be extremely unwise to assume that there is going to be a state of peace. What kind of security guarantees does Ukraine need in order actually for that economic reconstruction to actually happen?
Well, talking from my country's experience, and not only my country, but many in NATO, then NATO is a peace project. And because we are in NATO right now, we are not living through some really dark times like Ukrainians are. So the only security guarantee that is really functioning is NATO and NATO membership. Of course, when the war is going on, I understand that many allies have, it is, one of the conditions or preconditions is that you don't have open conflicts. And Russia knows that very well. And if we somehow agree to these gray zones, then the gray zones are a source of conflict, are the source of wars, and it will not end. So the only functioning security guarantee is NATO membership.
And we'll come back to this question of NATO membership. High Representative, let me turn back to you now. Now, we've talked about economic reconstruction, we've talked about security guarantees. Of course, the other fundamental leg is Ukraine's democratic consolidation. And it's very clear that, this is, again, even in the best of circumstances, this is going to be a real challenge. To consolidate your democracy, in a situation in which you're going to have an aggressive neighbor, again, even in the best of circumstances in which you liberate all your territory, and where economic reconstruction, precisely for that reason, will continue to remain a challenge, is not going to be easy. And of course, we don't have a silver bullet to this problem, but the closest we get to it is Ukraine's membership in the European Union. So could you perhaps give us your sense of where we are in this journey, and whether you feel that there is a sufficient sense of urgency that this needs to happen, and it has to happen fairly fast?
Well, first of all, let me say that I completely agree with the Estonian Prime Minister proposal, that we are working on that, and it will work, but quickly. Otherwise, the war will be over. But Ukraine belongs to the European Union family, and it will be a member of the European Union, definitely, after what has happened. After being bombed and after being killed by the Russians the way they are doing, the history is already there in the European Union. The future of Ukraine will be in the European Union. As other, this will oblige us to change our rules of procedure. This will change the size and the diversity of Europe, because if Ukraine becomes a member, many Balkans countries will do also, and first homework to change the way we work. Because I cannot imagine that passing from 27 to 36, no, 36 maybe not, but 33, could be possible with the rules in which we work and how we adopt decisions. So they have a homework, we have a homework. And they have a difficult homework because before the war, already Ukraine had a lot of problems. And we supported Ukraine before the war. We invested on the political and economic development of Ukraine 15,000 million euros. Well, with the war, we have invested 60 billion euros. But yes, Ukraine has to transform its structures, political structure, fight against corruption, and a real, truly democracy, a vibrant economy. All that being bombed, well, it's quite difficult. But they will do it because they want to do it quickly, and we have to accompany them. And the Commission is doing at a speed never seen before. Now it's done. Ukraine belongs to Europe. It could have been in a different way. But now it's done. Ukraine is a member of the European Union, European family, European culture, civilization, way of living. And this has to be institutionalized. They have to do their homework. We have to accompany them, and we have to prepare to receive Ukraine and others, like it or not.
Prime Minister, you had a remark on this question.
Yeah, just to add on that, as we have experienced joining the European Union, and it is, also Europe's interest that all these reforms are done, free market, rule of law, getting rid of corruption. And there's a short opportunity window that we had after regaining independence, that, every political force literally, holds hands and says that, we do these difficult reforms. Ukraine didn't do it in 1991. They didn't do the turnaround. But I can see that in Ukraine right now, there is this will, there is this hope, and there's the political will to really do the difficult reforms that we also need. So we have to use this opportunity window, because it will close after the war. It will close because, the political infighting and everything will kick in. And that's why it's very important to give this hope, to actually believe in Ukraine that they can do it.
Indeed. Sure.
May I just add on to that, because I think the messages we send from European Union right now, they are really important. There is a framework right now. There would be some kind of what we call an oral report back on how the criteria are being fulfilled during the spring, and then will be the more formalized feedback process during the fall in terms of Ukraine. And obviously we have all heard the Ukrainian ambitions. this year, or as President Zelensky said, 2023. So we shouldn't be able to misunderstand his point of view. But I think it's important now. I mean, everybody can agree on the key words merit-based. Nobody disagrees on that, because it's in a neutral way. It simply says you fulfill criteria, there are no shortcuts, take this seriously. Everybody agrees. There is sometimes also a way of saying merit-based is a way of saying don't rush into it. Be careful. Take it easy. And I don't really like the kind of the change in meaning of that. I think we need to be trustworthy in meaning what we are saying. It's merit-based, and we recognize merits. We help where we see problems, and don't accept the catch-22 kind of situation. I had a morning meeting with the Moldova president, Maya Sandu, and I mean, obviously they are being attacked by Russian influence and interest not to be able to fulfill these the obligations they try to fulfill to be able to have progress in the EU membership candidate status. So we also have to invest in helping legitimate governments in being able to actually reach their goals, to be able to use the possibilities that EU membership actually makes available.
Radek, I think what has emerged in a very powerful way up until now from all three speakers actually is that there is no such thing as the grey zone. There are no such things as buffer states anymore. We thought that they were. They're not. There are only frontier states, and you're either on one side of the frontier or on the other side of the frontier. And this obviously brings back this question both of EU enlargement and of NATO enlargement. Now, looking at both, and indeed, please do comment on both, but sort of zooming in on the EU enlargement point, and this goes back to the comments that the Prime Minister was making now. Of course, as we know, over the course of the last, certainly decade, this is a process that has been, on the one hand, hyper-politicized by specific member states that have slowed down this process. We started talking about it in terms of enlargement fatigue, and then all sorts of other considerations came in. And indeed, what was supposed to be a merit-based process, that merit became a sort of shifting goalpost, and it became an excuse for enlargement not to happen. So if you could perhaps comment firstly on this question of, do you feel that politically there is the sense of enlargement has actually re-become a strategic imperative? I mean, is there this awareness that has consolidated amongst member states?
These questions of buffer states and frontline states is particularly dramatic for Poland. We are the only country in the EU and NATO which is a neighbor of both Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine has won the right to negotiate membership in the EU by its amazing sacrifice. I don't think it would be happening quite as fast if it wasn't for that. And my advice to them is, don't think there will be shortcuts. You are not negotiating some kind of halfway deal between Ukraine and the EU. Ukraine has a body of laws accumulated over several decades that it will not change for you. You are actually acceding to that deal. And therefore, the faster you do it, the faster you translate EU legislation into Ukrainian and pass it in your parliament, the sooner you will become member. And I think that intellectual clarity about the nature of the process is important for the sake of negotiations, but also important to explain to your own people that you are adjusting to something that exists already. But I want to come back to the subject of the panel, which is there a possibility of return to security architecture in Europe? You know, the word architecture for me implies rules. Aesthetic rules, Palladio, and building trade rules. If you break them, the house will be at least ugly, or it will collapse. as so tragically happened all over Turkey recently. And it also implies participation. Architecture cannot be imposed on your partners. And we do have, or we used to have, some common rules and organizations with Russia. First of all, the UN. And remember, Ukraine was a member of the UN in its internationally recognized border, even in Soviet times. But the Security Council of the UN was meant to be the guardian of peace, rather than an immunity for those who breach the peace and start a war of aggression. So Russia is clearly in breach here. Secondly, OSCE. Let's remember what the basic deal was between the East and West then, that the East would let up on the dissidents and the West would recognize the new post-war borders in Europe. Russia is in breach too. And thirdly, the Council of Europe, where we decided after World War II that the way to protect national minorities was the Council of Europe Convention on Minority Rights. Russia would have been perfectly in its right to say, we don't like this particular Ukrainian law on the language or the rights of Russian speakers in courts in Crimea. Fine, you can do that, but you mustn't invade. And so what I'm saying is that the problem with recovering a sense of order, of predictability, is the nature of the Russian regime, which has broken these rules. And so I don't think the architecture can be restored without change in Russia. And lastly, I agree with the High Representative that if Ukraine wins, and we do have a change, a transformation in Russia, that could possibly be a constitutional moment for the globe so that our institutions, such as the Security Council, start better reflecting the changed balance of power.
Radek, I mean, sort of back to this question, though, of enlargement. Enlargement needs to happen. It needs to happen fairly fast. I mean, as the Prime Minister was saying, you need to sort of catch that momentum. It's not going to last forever. On the other hand, we also know that even if all conditions are fulfilled, things can happen afterwards. Yeah? Once you do enter the European Union. So perhaps flipping into the European Union in our discussion, you know, if you, on the one hand, need to accelerate an enlargement process, and on the other hand, you need to make sure that those democratic standards continue to be fulfilled once inside, what are the lessons that we should be drawing, and how is it that we have to start changing internally as well in order to make this happen?
Well, I keep telling the government of Poland, for which I didn't vote, that the best thing they could do for the membership of Ukraine is to fix our Polish problems with Brussels. Because we want Western Europeans to think that Ukraine will be a worthy and a useful member, rather than another large, poor, post-communist country with democracy and rule of law problems. But, you know, we are addressing it after the financial crisis, when it was discovered that some countries were breaking the rules of the Growth and Stability Pact. We've introduced the Fiscal Pact and a peer review of budgets and of financial credibility. And we are now doing it in the rule of law area as well. There is now a review process by the Commission of rule of law problems in all the member states. And all that needs to happen is that countries should just fulfill the recommendations and the deals that they have voluntarily agreed to.
Prime Minister, I know you wanted to react to some of these points, but let me also add another question concerning how is it that we have to change internally. I mean, if this is Again, there are no buffer states, there are frontier states, and so enlargement becomes a strategic priority, which obviously concerns Ukraine, but it doesn't concern only Ukraine. So here we have an enlargement process that expands considerably, at least potentially so. It is very clear that we also have to change our internal rules in all sorts of other ways. Given that I assume that your country would be in favor of that ongoing enlargement, would you also be in favor of a revision of those rules? I'm thinking obviously here about decision-making rules and in particular qualified majority.
Yeah. Before I answer that question, I wanted to react to what Radek said. I'm listening to you, and this is. It seems to me that Russia is concerned about and is fighting for all the rights of Russians except in Russia. So this is very clear. But what I wanted to add is that in terms of what it really needs, in terms of looking around or rethinking the rules and institutions, like after the Second World War, the United Nations was created. Definitely we need to rethink now, but one part of it is accountability. And without it, we just can't do it. Yesterday we had discussions and I hear that many countries except Ukraine have the fear of the nuclear escalation. And so that we can't hold accountable Putin or Lavrov, there's no international tribunal because otherwise, it will be nuclear threat. But it just can't be that those countries that have nuclear weapons are beyond the law, are beyond the rules. If it is so, we will have the pariah states that will use this because they know that nothing's going to happen to them. So accountability and not only the crimes, war crimes, but also leadership crime, which is the crime of aggression that can be only prosecuted by the special tribunal. And the leadership crime is the crime that all the other war crimes are stemming from. If you have no crime of aggression, you don't have war crimes either. But that's just a comment. Coming to your question, I mean, going back, European enlargement, first it was 6 states and every time it's the discussion that we can't work with a bigger group. And, for a small country that didn't have a voice for 50 years, it is very important that we have a voice now, that we are actually listened to around that table. So when we hear the talks about, qualified majority, we hear that, okay, we are again in that threat that we don't have a voice. And that is the risk how we see it. If we have, and we have problems with, certain issues. So far, we have managed to make decisions, even during this hard time of war this year, where we have been united and we have done the decisions, the necessary decisions. So I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, really, because it has so many, positive sides for countries like mine, small countries that didn't have a voice when we were occupied.
I see that. I also see the way in which other member states have been using and abusing this.
I see that, and we have to, of course, discuss this, how we can, use some tools so that if you do this, then, there are consequences. So you have to really make the calculations there. But it's just giving that, there's a qualified majority and we will do those decisions without you will just mean that you will leave out part of Europe. And that would actually also create instability if everybody does not have a say.
But I guess there are constant trade-offs, and I basically agree. But on the other hand, if you start at the end, what do we have to be able to do? And I would say 2 things, and I realize every member state doesn't agree with that. The first is actually how to cultivate the transatlantic relations. I mean, have a decision-making process that makes the European Union compatible with with the US in the long run. I think that's extremely important. I think nothing has shown that more the last year than the war in Ukraine. So every tendency to say that without neglecting at all the integrity of Europe, every tendency to say, well, this shows that we can make it on our own. I think that's simply not correct. So the other one is actually to be able to face China, basically. And a lot of different, very legitimate views on that. But we need to be able to cooperate on how to meet, react to, face, contradict China, and according to me, do that hand in hand with the US. Because otherwise we will have a very complicated world where the US has one position, the EU tries to find one position, and China will try to outsmart us. So I think it's extremely important to understand what is the purpose of what we're doing in a broader geopolitical context.
But back to this question of, so, here we are, we all love enlargement, great, but not everyone wants to enlarge. So there are a number of very important European countries that prefer staying outside. So perhaps, Prime Minister, could you give us your sense of, I'm obviously here talking about the Norway, Turkeys, United Kingdoms of this world. Now here we have a European political community. Could you give us your sense of how much value added can such a forum actually provide?
Honestly, hard to say, I would say. On the other hand, let's test it in later this spring. I mean, if you ask our Moldovan friends, they would say it's of huge importance. Obviously, it's a framework for cooperating with countries that are in different ways very nearby us in geographic sense, but also in terms of ambitions. So we actually literally discussed that the upcoming meeting in Moldova, and for them it's of huge importance. And I think it's a way of signaling also our, without any promises ahead, but of course, and it's very different. It's a way of also having extremely close connections with other countries. That, I mean, obviously the UK and Moldova are in different positions, but the EU needs to have organized ways to cooperate with countries that are very close to us.
High Representative, let's turn now to the question of European defence. Now, I think this last year has, in many respects, kind of really highlighted a contradiction. So on the one hand, we take defence more seriously. And European defence, and you highlighted this, has actually made some pretty remarkable steps forward over the last year. On the other hand, we still have a major problem when it comes to defence fragmentation, and the steps forward that have been made in that respect are not particularly impressive. On top of that, you could also make the argument that actually the last year, and this goes to also the transatlantic dimension to all of this, over the last year, our defense dependence on the United States has massively increased. So here we are, on the one hand, taking defense more seriously, and European defense more seriously. On the other hand, our dependence on the United States increasing, and this doesn't particularly make for a great recipe for the future of the transatlantic relationship, where I think there's interest actually on both sides of a more balanced partnership. So how do we kind of reconcile that contradiction? That's an easy question.
That's a cosmic question. Look, there's nothing new. NATO is the guarantee of territorial defense of Europe. It has been, it is, it will be. And nobody pretends to substitute the NATO. NATO is the alliance that ensures territorial defense of Europe. It doesn't prevent the European member states to develop capacities in order to, first, be a better partner of NATO, and second, to have the capacity to act by themselves when needed. They are not either or. It's not NATO or European defense. It's NATO guarantee, as you said, of the territorial defense of Europe, plus Member states taken seriously, not more seriously, seriously, because in the past they haven't taken seriously what does it mean to be an independent state and to have defense capabilities. Since the Euro crisis, Europe has been living a long process of disarmament. We have disarmed. Peace and economic crisis makes military expenditure the variable of budget adjustment. And that's why we don't have stockpiles, because the military was the adjustment variable. Less expenditure, less military expenditure. We don't need it. We don't need it. There is no war in our borders. Yes, we send some expedition in the Sahel and other parts of Africa. Yes, we use some rapid and chirurgical military intervention like in Libya. But a high-intensity war, interstate war, mobilizing thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and using capacities that are cheap and can be destroyed, a lot of them every day, it was out of our imagination. Now it's part of our reality. So, good news, we are increasing this capacity. Germany, I don't know when, but 100,000 million euros. Poland, increasing to 4 points of GDP, double of NATO standards. Poland is increasing their military capacity as anyone in Europe. But have a look at France. When I look at the new law for military financing in France, they go from 39 to 59 billion. That's an increase of 40%. Maybe they don't tell that very loudly, but this is an increase of 40%, 40% on the military expenditure of France. So France, Germany, Poland, and others. It is the clear feeling that we need to rearm. I'm sorry. When I'm saying that, people tell me, oh, you want to militarize Europe. No, I want Europe to be able to fulfill their responsibilities. Inside NATO, first, and when NATO will not act, be able to react when needed. And I insist, it's not either or. It's NATO plus European capacities to increase the strength of NATO and to be able to be a reliable and powerful partner. And this is the duty of the High Rep, not only for foreign policy, but for security and defense. Don't forget it. And that's why on the next defense ministers in Sweden, on the 6th and 7th of March, will be put on the table. We are in war mode, urgent war mode. So react quickly. We have the means and tools. And at the end, we talk about reconstruction of Ukraine, which is the PIB, the GNP of Ukraine, 150 billions, 150 billions. Let's suppose a capital income ratio of 1/3, and let's suppose that the capital of Ukraine has been destroyed by 1/3. We are still on 150 billion for reconstruction. This is one fifth of the next generation plan. This is 1/5 of what we have mobilized to face the COVID. So please have an idea of the dimensions of the problem in order to see what we are talking about. So if the Europeans want, they can rearm. And by the way, my figures, coming from the work of the European Defence Agency, my figure says that in the next 2 years, the European member states plan to spend 70 billion more for their capacities. Which is the problem, my dear Nathalie? That if we do it, everyone on its corner, multiplying by X its own capacities, without any kind of coordination, we will increase our duplicities and we will not fill in our loopholes. So spend more, it's on the way. Spend better by spending together, still not. And it's not just buying ammunition altogether, that's quite easy. The important thing is to decrease the number of different tools that our armies have and make them more interoperable. And this is a task that was, yes, okay, agreed on the books, And now it has to be a priority for the European Union. A priority. If not, we are going to waste a lot of taxpayer money.
I agree. Radek, I know you wanted to react on this, and perhaps on top of that, before we open up to the floor, if I could just ask you a final question also, I mean, about one thing that we, oddly, haven't actually talked about very much, which is our relationship with Russia. You know, sort of having a whole discussion on the future European security architecture without addressing this question. And of course, there's an obvious reason why we're not addressing it. We don't really know what Russia we're talking about. But perhaps, again, before we open it up to the floor, alongside reacting to anything you want to react to, if you could perhaps comment on that question as well.
Sure. We had a process of negotiating a partnership and cooperation agreement with Russia. There was a mandate for the Commission. And it was pretty detailed and pretty advanced. We could have had an association agreement with Ukraine and an association agreement with Russia. It was Russia that decided she was no longer interested. In, I think, 2011, Vladimir Putin decided that he would build an alternative, rival, Euro-Asiatic Union that will then negotiate with Brussels as an equal. And he needed Ukraine in his multinational project. So this was Russia's decision, and Russia can change its decision. Of course, not the current one, not the current leadership, because with them you can't make a deal because they're completely non-credible. But on European defense, I've lost my voice asking the question in the European Parliament, what has to happen in the periphery of Europe for you to take defense seriously? And there's a history to it. You know, after the Balkan Wars, we pledged ourselves to have a rapid reaction force. I think it was meant to be 70,000 troops. Nothing happened. Then we had the battle groups. Useless. Now at least we have a budget. It's wonderfully called Peace Facility, from which we are actually buying arms for Ukraine. Good. Thank you, High Rep, for noticing that Poland is basically doubling its defense expenditure, but this is really unfair. So Poland is going to be defending much richer countries further west that are spending much less. So spending some of that money through the European budget, to which we contribute in proportion to GDP, would be fairer. And Americans should be really pleased if we do that, because they have a challenge elsewhere. And if we can deal with lower order threats in North Africa, or perhaps, I don't want to speculate, but lower order threats on our own, that's good. That helps to relieve some of the burden that they have. But we need to get serious. It takes money. Without the pandemic, the European defense budget would have been 14 billion euros instead of 7. But it's still not enough. I mean, defense is really expensive. And also, we have misconstrued PESCO. Originally, when Bernard Kouchner and I signed the first letter to Cathy Ashton at my house in Poland, it was meant to be an avant-garde project only for countries that are really willing to do that, with joint rules of engagement, with a joint command, with a joint threat assessment. And it's become a political project at the lowest speed. But this was before the war. We now have to get real. We really need to go over to wartime leadership, because these things take a decade to construct defense capabilities. If we don't start right now, we will still be defenseless in 10 years' time.
Okay, let's open this up. Question over here.
Thank you very much, Alexei Goncharenko, member of the Parliament of Ukraine. I want to continue your line, and I have a question to High Representative Borrell and Prime Minister Kallas. My question is about Russia. And the question is, we are speaking now about European architecture of security. But if Russia as empire still exists, It will be like a fortress, on the walls of which, at the gates, is staying barbarians. So the question is not just to defeat Russia today, but to de-imperialize Russia, to change Russia. And that is possible. Like we saw it in history. Spanish Empire does not exist anymore. Austro-Hungarian Empire also. Who benefited is here in Munich, I think that's the best place to speak about it. Who benefited more than Germans in the fact that now German Empire does not exist, but there is free, wonderful country. So does Europe need policy to de-imperialize Russia? Not just to change Putin's regime, to de-imperialize Russia, to change it in order to really have a secure Europe. Thank you.
The question that needs to be addressed is the accountability regarding Russia as well. I mean, as after the Second World War, there was a Nuremberg Tribunal and there was a Tokyo Tribunal. The Nazi crimes were widely condemned across the world. And the effect of the Nuremberg Tribunal was that actually German people got to know about the crimes that the Nazis committed. And hence, you know, there is the change in mindset. There has been no such thing in Russia. So they are defining themselves through the empire, really, being the masters of that empire. And if people admire dictators, there is no obstacle in becoming one or submitting to one. So how to really, you know, tackle that cycle is that history matters. I mean, our history books were rewritten after we regained our independence to reflect all the crimes that were committed. It was not the same for Russia. They are teaching and learning from the Soviet history books. So the accountability is of utmost importance for the crimes of aggression, really to have, you know, the understanding also within Russian society and also maybe the contemplation there. Without it, I don't think it's possible.
Question here in the third row. Ah, sorry, High Representative.
Look, this is still a deep socio-cultural question. Russia will not disappear, but it may change. Which Russia? Putin's Russia? Which Russia? Russia that win the war, occupy Kiev and make Ukraine a second Belarus? Or a Russia that is being defeated and maybe there could be internal political changes? I don't know. But I can say the same thing about US. Which US? Biden US or Trump US? What would have happened with Trump in the White House? Would be in the same situation? No. So US, Russia, which US and which Russia? It's very premature to start thinking on the security architecture of Europe when we are in the middle of the war. And depending on the result of the war, the situation will be completely different. So let's concentrate our efforts on winning this war, keeping the door open to peace at any moment.
Yeah, but it goes, I mean, parallelly. I mean, if we think that let's concentrate on the war and not think about what comes after, then when the war is over, nobody talks about accountability anymore. Because it's done, let's move on, and then it would just repeat itself all over again. We have seen this in history. So we have to do it parallel. We have to talk about the accountability now. We have to work with the accountability now so that we would have sustainable peace in the future, that the imperialistic dreams that the Russians have, and I'm not talking about Putin, not Putin, it's the nation and what is in it. I mean, what are they celebrating really? Being the empire or not? Really, you know, we have to cut the cycle.
All these historical parallels, they always kind of
We
end
have
up in
lots of questions.
in a dead end. But everybody says, you know, China, for example. I mean, no chance that China will become a liberal democracy. Well, you can argue that. Well, what happened with Japan? What happened with South Korea? It's very possible, actually, to create stable, well-working democracies. You have to have a long-term view, but a very practical approach in the short run, I think.
Question here in the third row.
Hello. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Alexander Daniluk. It was for the last 3 days, lots was said about supporting Ukraine. I'm actually was with the army since the first day of the war, and only recently left it. So allow me to make a very brief intervention as well before you ask a question. But of course, I would like to thank you for your support. I know what it means to start the war with Kalashnikov in your hand and see how your capability is improving with every month when you receive support from our Western partners. So thank you for that. I also happened to be a Minister of Finance during the war since 2015. And I can tell you that it was very, very difficult, the National Security Chief. We were spending for our defense up to 6% of our GDP. It was very, very difficult. It's thought so expensive. But I felt that we ran out of time. We need to prepare. So I hear also a lot during this conference that it is expensive to support Ukraine. But I think the right approach to it, Ukraine spent 6%, it was a lot. Now it's about 60%. So in order to spend 60%, right, it's better to pay now more. And I'm glad that the rearmament and there is some voices that we need to, you need actually to invest more into this. So, and the European Union has this advantage. NATO allows to share expenses. We couldn't do it. So second, there was a point about Ukraine, what's going to happen after, right? And whether it's the time for reforms now or after. I believe there will be a very short window for reforms after the war, but now it is open. We're not Moldova. Russia is not intervening, blocking anything. It's time now to change Ukraine, the best time now for this. And the last one about security guarantees. Look, also there were some fears that Russia may break up and that creates enormous risk for everyone. First of all, don't you think that you control this? Russia is unpredictable. Something may change there without you willing or not willing. It's uncontrollable. So I think if Putin believes that you want to use this argument that, look, if I'm not there, it will be a mess in Russia. It will be a leverage over Europe, over NATO. So I think NATO needs to accept this. Accept this and accept it as a reality. And then plan accordingly. Are you up to the task? Are you ready for that or not? And last thing about persons and tranches, the best security guarantee for a person who was on the front line is, paraphrasing Marcus Cato, Russia delenda est.
Now, let me start actually taking more questions, because I've got many. I'm going to try and bring in as many people as possible. Question 2 rows back.
My name is Hans Atzbodin, Managing Director of the Federation of German Defense, Security and Defense Industry. I have a question to the High Representative. You impressively argued in favor of a strong defense industry in Europe. Thank you. However, at the same time, the EU Commission is driving a Green Deal, which is employing financial market actors as transformation agents. And there in the financial market, sustainability is widely perceived as being in contradiction to armament and weapons. So, for example, the State Bank of Bavaria has cancelled business relationship with armament companies just because they had more than 20% turnover in armaments, even supplying the Bundeswehr, our armed forces. So my question is, what will and when will the EU Commission finally give a strong signal to those financial actors that they perceive armament for our armed forces in the EU and NATO as prerequisite for sustainability? Thank you.
I will put your question to my colleagues in the Commission. I think it's perfectly right what we are saying. On that day, I've been talking with many people of the defense industry, asking for this taxonomy to be built in order to take into account that the defense industry, it's an important part of our political sustainability. And thanks God, remember that the proposal of putting the defense industry as a non-sustainable, in a negative level inside the taxonomy. This was avoided, but certainly we have to review the way we see at the defense industry.
Yeah, and the kind of right needs to know what the left hand is doing, right?
In Sweden, we had a very short-lived discussion in Sweden on how to exclude defense industry investments from sustainability. That discussion died the 24th of February.
And there's one more issue. You know, some politicians are telling us that, yes, we need more ammunition, we need more equipment, but there are these procedures. Don't believe it. As defense minister, I bought plenty of equipment, plenty of ammunition. I believe every country in Europe has a clause that if you have an urgent operational need, you can do it without tenders. You can just go and buy it and give the contracts. What is more urgent operationally than winning the war in Ukraine?
Absolutely, absolutely. There was a question at the back there. Yeah, lady at the back.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Yasko, member of Ukraine Parliament. And I want to reflect on what I just heard about Ukraine membership in the EU. You know, when I hear that the President Zelensky said it should be 2023 and the reflection from and the conclusion from the EU, I want to tell you that it's not the President Zelensky position only. He speaks the majority of the voice of Ukrainian people. And Ukrainian people don't understand that there are procedures. They don't understand that there are chapters and rules. You know, today it's 2023, but 9 years ago it was 2014. And I, together with thousands of Ukrainians, we were standing at Euromaidan. And now we sometimes even don't remember that. In my life, I'm 32. I already had 3 revolutions for the European values. And I'm saying this today because I'm very happy when the Radek Sikorski says that when there is urgency for defense, we can do this even sometimes without procedures. But there should be something similar on the EU membership also for Ukraine, because Ukrainian people know that we are a part of Europe and they will not understand when in some of the conclusions there will be, I don't know, chapters of different rules. Please, let's make that special procedure. Let's make it fast, because this is something that Ukrainian people are fighting for many, many years. And for us, it's not economic cooperation. It's our existential choice that we made a long time ago, not this year or during the war. And I want you to remember that. Thank you.
We'll go back to this question of should we have a special procedure for Ukraine, but let me go to John exactly here at the front row.
John Chipman of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, so I have what the French call a déformation professionnelle. I was just speaking to nuestro amigo Javier Solana here about this strategic issue. We've talked about European security architecture and European military capacities, but insufficiently about reviving a properly strategic culture. In the Cold War, we had 2 principles in NATO. One was flexible response, the other was escalation dominance. In this conflict, we've seen sequential response and intramural escalation fear. We have talked more about how frightened we might be about escalation than put in the mind of the opponent in Moscow a greater fear of escalation. It's been strategically illiterate, our intramural dialogue these last 11 months. Defense is not escalation. Offensive weapons are needed for counterattack. Counterattack is needed for defense. Ukraine has a UN Article 51 right to defend itself. Everyone else has the same UN Article 51 right to assist it. Ukraine's non-membership of NATO is strategically irrelevant. The European security order has been challenged, like the Middle East one was challenged when Iraq invaded Kuwait. Kuwait had no defense agreement with any one of the 50-plus countries that came to Kuwait. People came to Kuwait because they knew the next stop might be Saudi Arabia, and that would be the end of whatever Middle East security order lies. So can I appeal to Prime Minister Kaja Kallas and others, including Radek, to continue to remind people that there are some lessons from the Cold War that we've properly forgotten, and others, strategic muscle memory, that we haven't sufficiently revived. Let's have strategic thinking as well as debate.
Thomas Silves, mic over here.
Thomas Silves, former president of Estonia and various other things. I'd ask the participants to explain their personal belief in how serious the European Union is about enlargement to Ukraine, given that we have heard here and for a long time, on the one hand, that East Europeans are hawks, warmongers from Western Europeans, and then we hear, on the other hand, that we have to take into account the historical experiences of the global South. But we have the historical experiences of the mother of the Prime Minister of Estonia, who was deported as a 6-month-old, but we don't want to hear the historical experiences of the Poles, the Estonians. Is the European really serious about bringing in another 44 million people who have had experiences with the behavior of Russia, when we hear from the same podium and have heard throughout the past year about how the East Europeans are hawks and warmongers? I mean, are you serious? That's my question. Are you serious that the European Union really wants to include more of us who have had empirical experience with Russia to actually prick the balloon of belief about Druzhba Narodov and the wonderful culture of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky?
So, Giuseppe, are we serious? And if we are serious, are we ready to rethink our procedures in order to demonstrate our seriousness?
I didn't know it was going to be a debate about enlargement. I was prepared to discuss about the security, architecture, the geopolitical Europe, and about how to face the war. About enlargement, I have nothing more to say than what the European leaders at the highest possible level have said. President of the Commission, President of the European Council, and all leaders of the European Union member states. What can I add? They said clearly, they engaged, they did the procedures as quick as possible. The procedures are still there. Don't imagine a system without procedures. They are there, they have to be fulfilled. It's not my specialty, the rules and ways of the enlargement, but all European leaders here and out of this room have been saying once and again that Ukraine and Moldova, and later Georgia, will be members of the European Union, and the process is open. But don't expect it to be done overnight without any kind of fulfilling some requirements.
And in fact, part of the point is actually that if those requirements are met, then there is that democratic consolidation, which is kind of the purpose of the whole exercise, right? Radek, you had a point on this.
This is a wonderful moment, and thank you, Thomas, because a year ago, exactly, here, us, supposed hawks, were saying he's going in. And the supposed realists were saying he's bluffing. Well, who was right? And what we require is A, don't patronize us anymore, and B, since you didn't listen to us when we were saying it before, listen to us now. On enlargement, this is going to be interesting and difficult because there is pressure from below, from the populations to do it. But of course, including Ukraine will lower the average wealth in the European Union. So some countries will become net contributors earlier, for example, Poland, and we don't mind. But it will also change the balance of power inside the European Union. Ukraine will have 60 MEPs. The European Union will be rebalanced. Not everybody will welcome that. And the question of timing is, of course, very interesting. We have two distinguished Spaniards here. Am I right in remembering that Spain was the last country that was admitted into the EU first and then had a transition period to accept the acquis communautaire, right? And then Sweden already had to do the pre-accession. But you know, we could make an exception and go to the previous system, have a political membership first, and then open one area of integration after another at a pace that both Ukraine and Europe can sustain. It would only take a will.
I want to take two final questions. There's Charles Grant, who's been very patient there at the back.
No? But
Oh, yeah, I can't. Yep, Charles.
Charles Grant, Centre for European Reform in London. We haven't talked very much about the old French concept of strategic autonomy in the area of defence today. It's not such a popular idea now, I gather, particularly in places like the Baltic countries and Poland, obviously in the light of the war, given the incredible importance of the US defence link now. But my question is this: if somebody like Donald Trump or somebody close to him comes back to being president in the United States again, are the Europeans going to start talking about European strategic autonomy again in the area of defence? And linked to that, if they do start to talk about strategic autonomy, will they think that the British need to be part of it to make it a stronger and more effective strategic autonomy?
Thank you, Charles. There was a hand there at the back, but I don't... yeah, there you are. Exactly.
Thank you, Natalie. Hannah Neumann, member of the Defence Committee of the European Parliament. So please allow me to take the discussion also back to the issue of EU defence. Despite the Russian aggression, I feel like we are stuck in a Groundhog Day discussion here. We are talking European strategic autonomy, European sovereignty for 5-6 years. After the Russian aggression, European Defence Agency wanted to check on the member states' capability gaps. They were supposed to report to the European Union just to find out almost none did. Now you're sharing, and I share this assessment, Mr. Borrell, that the member states are growing their defence budgets, yes, but they are still not coordinating on EU level. So they will spend side by side, they will even run into competition and pay more for less that they get. So what does it need? And we have, people from the member states also on the podium. If the Russian aggression is not enough, what does it need for us to really work on EU defence, which means giving up national sovereignty and moving it to the EU level and not just talk?
yeah.
So, very final comments from our panel. Let me just take it in turn. Dick, let me start with you.
Well, I couldn't agree more with the speaker. It really, we are past the hour. We are behind the curve. Ursula von der Leyen, in one of her State of the Union speeches, asked the member states, "Do you want to get serious about defence?" Really, it's the Council, it's the member states that have to make the transition, get serious, and get it done.
High Representative.
I agree, but between saying and doing, there is a little difference. Defense becomes a competence of the member states. Defense has not been communitarized. It's not a community competence. Let's remember that. We at the Commission, we can claim whatever we want, but defense is a member state competence. We can push, we can support, but at the end, it's the Council, the member state decision. And yes, we have to push for it, and we do, and we advance, but miracles doesn't exist. So if you believe that tomorrow all member states will agree on a common defense investment, sorry, it's not going to happen. But we can do, step by step, a better integration, coordination, interoperability of our arms. And that's what we are doing. And we have a lot of work done. Don't dismiss the work that has been done, but don't ask for miracles. Defense remains a strong dimension of the national sovereignty. And the armies are powerful tools with identities, and to make them to become a single one working in accordance with rules coming from a kind of a community is not going to happen tomorrow. But we can do a lot in order to make them spend better by spending together in several fields. It's a long process. The war in Ukraine is certainly a big incentive. Europe is being done on the crisis. That's right. And this crisis will make us to react and to assume our responsibility, because strategic autonomy no need because NATO's there. No. NATO is there. It will be there is something that we need and nobody's questioning. But this war has to represent an awakening for the member states to spend better, to spend more, to have more military capabilities, more interoperable, being a stronger part of NATO, and being stronger in order to work when NATO will not be there. So this is something that we have to claim once and again. This is a crisis, this is an opportunity. We have to break taboos. We broke a lot. Who could have said before the war that the European Union would be spending European money altogether to give arms to a country being attacked? Frankly, don't be so pessimistic and so negative. There is a lot of work to do, but we have doing a lot, and we will do much more, because this war will be a big incentive for doing that.
Prime Minister Kristersson.
Well, I think the last year has kind of taught us that the most relevant version of, so to speak, strategic autonomy is actually for European countries to invest more in our own country's defense and thereby show the Americans that we are really partners in this. I think that's the most obvious lesson learned in terms of autonomy, that is cooperation.
Thank you. Prime Minister Kallas.
Yeah, I have a few points also on other topics. On strategic autonomy, I agree that first we should all meet and really do in actual deeds, investing the 2%. The 2% of our GDP should be absolute minimum. So when those who are talking about it should also show it not in words but actually in deeds, that we raise our autonomy by being more able to defend also ourselves, and that requires investment to defense. Regarding the accession process, there is this set of reforms that is required, and it is also the basis of prosperity. I mean, free market, rule of law, to make investors trust your economy, your system, and then it is also necessary to do those reforms so that the country could develop to the level where the other countries are, and there is a convergence between the countries that already are in European Union and whose GDP and well-being of people is better. So it is needed for both sides, but also for the European side. It's a bit, we hear that, it's necessary for Ukraine, but it's actually also necessary for us that our, internal market is bigger, then the whole region is more secure because it's dependent on the fundamental values that we share. And what Thomas asked, yes, I remember the 24th of February very well, when we had the meeting also with other prime ministers who were quite shocked. I heard so many times that we were naive, we should have listened to you. And now I hear this, that, okay, we are the adults in the room. I mean, not we, but again, those countries who said that we were naive and should listen to you, we know better now. And my question is, why do you think you know better now when you didn't know before? And why do we really try to use the same track that was used before that didn't work? We have, every next time Russia takes a bolder step, every next time it's bigger. So we have to cut the cycle. And I really, really plead that we are being listened to, because I know not many European countries understand that we all have our skin in the game, but some of us more than the others. And if I hear from countries that have much better neighbors than we do, and that they are afraid of the nuclear escalation. I mean, believe me, if there is nuclear escalation, it will be on Ukraine, it will be on those countries and not countries in the middle of Europe. So if they are not afraid, so shouldn't be Germany, France, other countries that are really, really much further away from this war? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister. Thank you to all panelists. I think the bottom line to the last hour and a half has been, if you're serious about the long term, be it in terms of security, of the economy, of democracy, there has to be a far, far greater urgency now. So thank you very much for this great discussion. Thank you for the great questions.